Well, I'm really excited about tvOS. I don't know about you guys. I use an Apple TV pretty much every day. It is, I probably watch too much TV and listen to too much music through the TV. And I'm really excited that we're finally able to develop apps for it because I'm sick of not having Amazon Prime on my Apple TV. So this is just an introduction, very high level. There is some code examples. I built two very trivial apps to kind of show you some of the stuff involved with getting started with tvOS. When I started this process, I was thinking that it might be cool to do like a super deep dive into everything tvOS, and I realized that this is another complete platform, just like iOS or OS X. Not just like an extension of your iOS app like watchOS would be, or the extensions for all kinds of stuff on your phone. This is going to be high level. There will be some examples, but this is a great time to solicit you guys and tell you that there are a lot of opportunities for future presentations here at CocoaHeads. I actually have a list of potentials at the end of the presentation to give you guys a little bit of inspiration. But let's get started. So, as many of you guys know, we got a lot of new hardware. Just to give you an overview so you can kind of get a feel for what this thing is capable of. But 64-bit A8 processor, 32 gigs or 64 gigs of storage, 2 gigs of RAM, which is nice. Not gigabit Ethernet, which is kind of weird. Whatever though, it's got gigabit wireless. All the connection stuff you would think of, and it's got a fancy new remote, which if you guys haven't seen it or got a chance to play with the one that's sitting up here, it's pretty cool. So in addition to all the new hardware, we get the new platform, revamped user experience, we get a full app store finally. Apple mentioned universal purchases. They didn't give us a whole lot of details on this. What we think it means is that you'll be able to purchase one app from you as a developer, and you would get access potentially to your iOS version and your Apple TV version of your app. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of information about that. It's just what we think they meant when they said that. On top of that, in the new platform, we get access to tons of familiar tools that we're used to, like Xcode, of course. We'll talk more about what all you get access to. But then we also get a new way to build apps, which is pretty cool. It can lighten the load depending on what type of app you're trying to build. And obviously with the new remote, and they're really pushing the new game controller for games, which they've had a game controller API on iOS for a couple of years now, I think. But they're pushing it for the Apple TV. They even highlighted the third-party game controller on the website. So we have new ways and a new philosophy of interacting with our users. So before we get started on any of the good stuff, I'm going to talk about some of the bad stuff. We have three major development challenges as I see them. Obviously, there's the new user interaction model. We're used to people touching a screen or moving a mouse or something like that, and Apple has built an entirely new paradigm, at least from our perspective, called Focus, and a Focus engine that kind of powers everything. So wrapping your head around this is not, it makes sense when you think about it, but in the code and technical aspect, it's not always super intuitive. No persistent local storage. This is a big one. If your app has any non-trivial amount of data, you will have to integrate a cloud platform of some kind, whether it be iCloud or a custom backend or whatever. Cloud is required. On top of that, your app size, the app that the user initially downloads from the store to their Apple TV, has a maximum size limit of 200 megabytes. So you can't have like a huge game with tons of levels in one binary that gets downloaded at once. You have to use Apple's new technology called on-demand resources, which they really hyped this summer at WWDC, which basically means the example they gave, which is a great topic for a presentation, guys, by the way. But on-demand resources basically allows you to partition off parts of your application assets and data for download at later times. The example they give is, say you download a game and you only download the first 2 levels in the core app. And as the user finishes round 1 or level 1, level 3 starts to download in the background. And it's always downloading +1, the next level, as the user goes through your game. And this is really cool. It helps specifically on the phone, not to change topics, but specifically on the phone, it really helps with data consumption. And everybody hates having that 16 gigabyte iPhone. So it helps with that type of stuff, but it's really cool on the Apple TV. But it is something very important to keep in mind when you're developing for the platform. So the big thing that Apple gave us with tvOS is they gave us 2 ways to develop apps. You can build native apps, which we'll talk about and have an example for, or you can build what they're calling, I don't like the name, but they're calling them ClientServer Apps. Basically, this is the new TVML, TVJS stuff. It's really cool, especially if you have a media-heavy app like a picture stream or movie stream or music or something like that. It's very geared towards well-structured hierarchical applications, not necessarily something like a game or game. So let's talk about native apps. Very similar to building apps for iOS. Pretty much anything you can think of mainstream-wise that you would do on iOS, whether it be Objective-C and Swift, and all the things that come along with that. Storyboards, you get access to those, which is really nice. Plus all the new storyboard references and things like that that are coming with Xcode 7. And you inherit a ton of frameworks from iOS. I didn't get a full count on this, but it's something like 40-ish. Maybe I'm overestimating, maybe 30-ish, I don't know. But a couple of the big ones to point out, obviously UIKit, the whole Swift standard library. For people that do games, there is SpriteKit, SceneKit, GameKit, OpenGLS, Model.io, Metal, hence the 64-bit processor, so you can take advantage of some really heavy graphics horsepower. And then things like AV Foundation, AVKit, CloudKit, if you want to do a custom iCloud-based backend. So if you have an app that needs not only private storage that iCloud offers, but also public storage, maybe you have like a social network or some kind of photo sharing app or something like that. And then also core data, core graphics, you know, it kind of runs the gamut of things that you can access. But all these things really just sum up and say that developing for tvOS is pretty simple if you are a good, or you know, if you know how to develop for iOS. You'll be very familiar. So I have a demo. Does anybody have any questions before I go into this?
I guess, are there any notable exceptions from those frameworks? I guess like stuff like core telephony or whatever is not going to be.
I mean, yeah, obviously you're not going to have things that are phone specific. But I mean, honestly, I looked over the list. I didn't look for notable exceptions. I was just so happy that they had things like AV Foundation and Metal and stuff like that. I'm sure there are exceptions. I think the biggest exception is actually that they added things. So, like for instance, UI Collection View has some new delegate methods that can help you control focus and stuff like that. So I think more things were added than were taken away, which is pretty nice.
I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
So you said no like local storage, but I see core data in there as a framework. You know if that has to be like iCloud?
I think it does. Yeah, I think it has to be iCloud enabled core. Yeah.
Or maybe just in memory.
Yeah. So when I say no persistent local storage, what I mean is your app can have, while the app is running, a temporary persistent local storage to store things. But when your app is done and it quits, it better save it to the cloud, or it's not guaranteed to be there when you get back. Yeah. So yeah, you could use core data locally. You could use key value store, user defaults, all that stuff. But if it hasn't been saved to some cloud component, it could potentially be cleared out the next time your app quits. It's very similar to, I guess the best way I can explain it would be, on iOS, you know, the system manages RAM and stuff for you in the background. Similar to that, the system manages and always keeps it like super trim and clean behind the scenes.
Did they say how much RAM the unit has?
2 gigabytes. Yeah, 2 gigabytes. It's a pretty beefy, for an Apple TV, for an iOS-based device, it's pretty beefy. Any other questions? All right. So I built a simple app here. It is called Native Cats. This is a native built tvOS application. I did storyboards. There's a nice tab view controller here that controls a collection view and just a simple view controller that has just an image and a caption on it. Dive in here. So for the first view controller, it's pretty simple, not a whole lot of code. This is actually it. I have a property here for, it's basically a data source. This would wrap something like your network code or however you're retrieving data from a server or something like that. I actually have all my stuff embedded in the main bundle just for simplicity because I didn't want to have to write any cloud code for this example. But yeah, so that's how I have kind of done it. So when this view loads, what it does is it's a UI collection view controller that is wrapped in a tab view. And then on view did load, it sets its data source to be this cat data source that I've instantiated here. So this will populate the collection view with whatever you want to populate into the collection view. And I have basically pictures. So for the other view controller, it's a little bit more complex, but actually a lot simpler, really. When it loads in, it's just a standard UI view controller. It has two IB outlets, an image view and a caption view, or a caption label. And all it does is populate those on load. That's it. Pretty simple. Going back to the collection view, I have a custom cell, which all it is just a cell that has an IB outlet to an image view. Nothing crazy. And my fun little data source, which is not super important what this code does, because in a real app it would pull from a network source or handle caching, tons of different stuff if you are familiar with networking code at all, pulling data from remote sources. But basically, behind the scenes, all this does is it takes images from my main bundle, loads them into an array, and serves them up through the UI collection view data source protocol right here. So my collection view has one section, it has however many cat pictures in it, and then this self-item index path down here, all it does is load up a cell and populate its property with an image from the data store. Any questions so far? So this is really all there is to it, to building an app. I mean, yeah, I've omitted a rather large portion of all the network code, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, it is exactly like building an iOS app. You just have to keep in mind certain caveats. Like the one thing I found that gave me a headache for probably an hour was I couldn't figure out how to get the focus engine working. And there was a property here that you had to set. There's a new property on the storyboard. You select your image and it's adjust image when focused. So this gives you the nice automatic zooming the image up bigger than the other ones around it when it's in focus. It's really nice because you get a lot of the work done for you for free. So you guys ready to see this awesome app? All right. I didn't get a chance to load any of this onto the new Apple TV, so we'll still just do AirPlay over here. But you'll kind of get the gist of it. All right. So these are my cats, Fred and George. They're brothers. As you can tell, they love each other. Did find this bug. If you go back to the tab view and you come down, you see that gray bar at the bottom? That is something weird where the UI collection view controller is moving up. I don't know. Need to file a bug or something. But yeah, so you can actually pull up a fake remote, and you can you hold the Option key, it simulates swiping, so you can kind of swipe through these, and you can even do the fancy parallax thing. So you can kind of rotate the cat, which is pretty cool. But you can also use the keyboard to kind of move around, navigate like you would anything. Pretty intuitive, and like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of code just to get this stuff up and running, and also to get the focusing stuff, everything working correctly. I was going to have it so that you could, click on a picture and it would enlarge but I ran out of time. But if we go look at our dogs, obviously George does not want us to look at dogs. But yeah, so that's it. I mean, super simple. Very familiar if you're used to developing iOS apps or if you have started using storyboards to develop Mac apps at all. Any questions about don't quit the simulator while the app is still running? Any questions? Thoughts? All right. Back to the slides. So that's native apps. Now going on to what Apple has called ClientServer Apps. Basically, what this is I didn't put this image where it needs to go. So this is what the client-server app architecture looks like. You download, you still have to create an Xcode project, but basically all it contains is an app delegate that has some special protocol methods in it. And it reaches out to a remotely located JavaScript file that basically controls your entire application from the server. And your views and stuff are templated out and laid out with a custom version of XML, which Apple calls TVML, so TV markup language. And they have a custom JavaScript library called TVJS, so TV JavaScript. And you use these, so your app interacts, loads up the remote JavaScript file, which then loads up and pushes and pops TVML files containing data onto the view hierarchy. So there's not really any other than the app delegate. There's no like traditional development. So you can see here steps 1, 2, and 3. App delegate loads up the TVJS file. TVJS file loads up and controls all interactions with the TVML files, and then the TVML file presents the interface and the content to the user. If we go back, so this has 4 key components. The app delegate and this thing called TVMLKit, which is the protocols and stuff you'll need to interact with all of this stuff. And then there's a new TVJS, the JavaScript library, and TVML. As I was saying earlier, this is most useful for somebody like Netflix or YouTube or Flickr or somebody who has a stream of well-structured hierarchical content that typically reuses a lot of the same views. Not a lot of dynamic content. You're just presenting media in some way. And you can do a lot of different fancy ways, and Apple's actually provided some pretty nice templates. About 18 of them, I think. And they have a couple of really good example projects that kind of showcase the native side and the client-server side.
Does anybody know if this is kind of has its roots in the current Apple TV channel?
I would bet, yeah, I bet that's how they've done all this and where it came from. That's the only reason I can think of doing it this way. Yeah, I would bet money, and you're shaking your head. I would bet that that's how they're making current Apple TV apps. Which, if you think about it, if everything you're writing lives on a server that is not an iPhone, you don't have to recompile your app every time. And this is a great example of how Netflix and YouTube are able to change their app slightly and add new content like super quick without having to do any kind of crazy stuff. And I don't think they ever, like even when Apple releases a software update for the Apple TV as it is now, I think those are just strictly related to the operating system itself and not necessarily third-party apps, other than activating them and loading them up. But that's speculation. So yeah, so the TVML, it's basically XML. Apple has built all these fancy elements that you can nest inside of a document structure. And like I said, they've already built a bunch of templates that are pretty cool. And as I mentioned, really nice for dynamically loaded content, though I couldn't quite figure out how that worked. Also a great topic for a presentation. TVJS, it's a custom JavaScript library for interacting with the TVML files. This is the gatekeeper between your TV and the interaction that your user has with it, and all of the backing data and views and stuff. So If you looked at a diagram, you'd have your app and your user interacting with it, which talks to this JavaScript file, which basically wraps all of the TVML, all of the data, all the content, all that. But it's heavily incorporates. We are not in sync here. Okay, so yeah, we have any JavaScript developers here? Anybody has familiarity with it? So it uses a lot of the standard DOM classes as defined by the World Wide Web Consortium or whatever they're called. And then there's some specific custom JavaScript classes that Apple has made for interacting and getting like device data and handling events and stuff like that. Pretty cool stuff. It's not a huge library, actually. So yeah, that's TVJS. And then TVMLKit, this kind of ties in with the app delegate. This is what has all the custom protocols and stuff you need for interacting with all of the TV stuff. Not really a whole lot to go into. It's not a very big framework. Really all there is stuff for, it's a TV app delegate, or I think that's what the protocol is called, which basically lets you interact with the JavaScript file. You've already seen that. So, I did not build an exact copy of my native app, but I did build a similar thing to kind of give you what it takes to build similar types of apps. So, starting with not the app delegate. All right. So one of the things that Apple is really cool about this model is all of your actual content lives on a server. So Apple has given us, this was already on the system, but there's a pretty cool way to activate a local server running on your Mac. I'll show you how to do that in just a second once I show you the basic structure of this project. So we have 3 subdirectories. Can you guys see that okay? All right. So we have a JavaScript file, JS, which is where all the TVJS stuff lives. There's a resources for like images and stuff like that, and then there's templates, which are where your TVML files live. I did see there are a couple different ways to do this, including like some custom JavaScript files that basically their whole purpose is to serve up a dynamic template as opposed to just like a static TVML file. So there's tons of different ways to do this, but this is the simplest just to kind of show you how it works. So if we look at this JavaScript file, that is not very good. It's also not very good. Let's do this. Sorry, guys. So now if we look at the JavaScript file, you can see that this one is pretty simple. The example Apple gives, they actually have a couple of different files, one for the main application and the other for handling user interaction and one for handling loading the screens and stuff. So you can get pretty complicated, but this is the gist of what you need to get started. Basically this gets the document URL. This is, from my understanding, where the interaction point is for your app comes into here with the URL, and all this stuff gets started for everything. This controls navigation. This is what happens at app launch. So you can see it looks for a local host location in the TVML file to load up the main UI. And this is what happens is called when the application exits. So that's that. So you can see pretty simple just to get a simple application up and running. I have a folder full of images, and this is my TVML file. Now ideally this would probably be dynamically populated, or everything I have is pretty much hard-coded with the location of the server and the image directly to the location. And I have 11 images here. But you can see they have the document tags at the bottom and the top wrapping the whole thing. Very similar to, have you guys used XML or HTML at all before? Very similar to that. We're using the stack templates, so it's kind of sort of be a collection view. There'll be a banner at the top, and then we'll have a collection list that has 2 shelves, or 1 shelf, I think. And then each of these these lockups is an element inside of that shelf, the collection view. All right, so that's that. So this is really the only part of the application that you interact with. You can actually delete the storyboard, the starting view controller that you get, XC assets, and the only other thing you have to do is add a network security key to your info P list. That's pretty simple to do though. So first off you import TVMLKit and you create an instance to an app controller, a TV application controller object. Then I have a couple of static variables here that define the location to my content server. And then on application did finish launching with options, you go through and you set up the window frame for your application. You instantiate the TV controller. You're going to load in your server URL to the JavaScript file through the app controller context. Sorry, you create an app controller context object. And then you load in the JavaScript file, the location to it here. And then at the end, you basically instantiate your TV application controller with the context, the window, and the delegate, which handles a couple of lifecycle events. Everybody with me so far? All right. So right here we have assigned self as delegate. So we have to conform to a protocol, which is the TV application controller delegate protocol. This is very similar to the app delegate protocol, where you get did finish launching with options, basically the lifecycle calls. So we get did finish launching with options, did stop with options. There's this evaluate app JavaScript in context, and then there's a failure callback as well. There's not a whole lot of code here other than logs to kind of print out and show you when each event happens. But as you can imagine, just like with iOS, there's some customization points where you can load and do things and interact with your data on the other end. So the only thing left to do is start up the server. So I know you guys can't really see this, but basically all it is a Python script. So Python and then -m, and it's a simple HTTP server is the call, and we're going to go to port 900. So that's not good. Maybe I did something wrong. 901, sorry. There we go. So I got the server up and running. Let's go ahead and launch this application. So this server is remote, even though it's not really. So it's just got a bunch of images in here, and you can see that it's fairly similar to the collection view controller of the native app we built before, except we didn't really have to write any iOS code or tvOS code. And in theory, it should be relatively simple to make slight adjustments to your layout files and stuff like that while they're hosted on the server. Any questions? Thoughts? All right.
Have you played with any video controllers yet or anything?
No, like I said, I was just trying to keep this simple and straight to the point. They do provide templates for certain types of like images and things like that, buttons, alert views. Actually, I have a huge list of them, but I'm not connected to the internet, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, they do have stuff for handling video. I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen so far. I mean, I know we're only seeing this for the first time now, but as we've talked about, this has probably been something in the making for years. Fairly simple.
The JavaScript and XML doesn't have to be inside the app. It can be served off.
It actually only operates on the server. It does not go inside the app at all.
How do you handle styling? Like if you want to change colors
That is, if you ever used XML or HTML, it's very similar. You just edit attributes on each tag, and I didn't go too much into that. Kind of skimmed it, but yeah, it looks basically like you're editing XML or HTML.
There's no
There's
dedicated
CSS.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's specific attributes you can change. You don't have
Yeah.
everything you can do in CSS, but like
Yeah, it's-
TV color.
Yeah, it's like the old school way of doing CSS, where it's directly in line inside of the elements, and it's not in a separate file or anything like that.
You could.
Yeah, I guess you could. Yeah, if you did it with, yeah. So
I would think that if it's user default, it would stick around. Like it's not going to clear that if you guys want to store tokens and stuff for.
we're going back to persistent local storage. Apple is pretty explicit. It does not give any, except for this one thing, gets to stay around. It says everything. There is no persistent local storage.
So if you have to log into the service every time you turn on the app.
You can do all the token storage and stuff like that through iCloud. NS User Defaults has an iCloud equivalent, NS Ubiquitous User Defaults or something like that. I forget what it's called, but it's essentially NS User Defaults, but it's located in iCloud.
Is there access to the keychain?
I don't know. That's a good question.
They made some reference to, if you buy the app on iPhone, you have it on your TV. Like, do they have a concept of bundling, or are they still totally distinct?
So yeah, the universal purchases. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to work. You can add a TV target inside of your iOS app. It does not work like an extension would. It's its own separate little bundle. Not sure how submitting that to the App Store works. Yeah, that's one of the questions we kind of still have right now. In theory, I would hope that you just package everything up and it sends it all at once when you make a submission, but I'm not for sure. Any other questions? All right, a couple goodies. TV Services Framework. This is like an extension for your Apple TV app. The whole purpose of this TV Services Framework is to populate the top shelf. So everybody's familiar with, on the current Apple TV, if on the top row they are locked and you can't move them, they are Apple's apps. There's movies, music, something else. I don't know. But basically when you hover over one of those, when you focus in on one of those, like the Movies app, it shows you on the top row of the screen a list of hot movies from Apple, and also maybe your most recently watched or newly available episodes for download or something like that. Well, now Apple has opened this up so that your app can reside on the top row and populate that top shelf. Fairly simple API. I actually was trying to add an extension to my native demo before you guys got here. Top shelf, this one file right here. Basically, what it looks like we would do is create an array of content items and then pass them back, and it would populate the top shelf. It's not. But yeah, so fairly simple. This is all there is to it. You even have some styling options, so you can section it like the TVs, the TV app would, where you have your hot stuff from Apple and then your content on the left, and there's that clear divide in the middle. So that's the TV Services Framework. And the other one, which is really just eye candy, but it's still pretty cool, is the Parallax Artwork stuff. Basically all this is a fancy layered image. So I actually created one to show you guys in the demo. So if you come over here, does anybody play Destiny? Anybody at all? Any Xbox, PlayStation? Yeah, okay. So all this is, it's a 3-layered image. So we're going to take layers here. So we have all the text. We have this fancy logo in the middle here. We have the Earth, and then we have the star field behind it. So 4 layers: text, logo, the Earth, and the star field. Apple was even nice enough to provide us with a template project to get this up and running. You have to have your sublayers grouped into this art folder. You guys, anybody not familiar with Photoshop? At least roughly, vaguely? Okay. And they provided us with this pretty cool application plugin called LSR. And what it does is it lets you update, do a preview image, and you can kind of interact with it here. And then you can export it, which all it does is exports it in this custom format, which I'll go ahead and show you here. And it is it's called an LSR file. So it's Parallax .lsr. And in addition to the fancy or the convenient Photoshop plugin, they also provided this cool Parallax Previewer application. So you can see here that I have 4 layers. You can kind of see what the LSR file looks like under the hood. You can even make adjustments to it over here. And you can press play to see what it looks like. And it's very subtle. Each layer is kind of independently moving from each other, so you get this nice little 3D effect. And on the new Apple TV remote, a user can hover over your icon or your picture or whatever, anywhere pretty much that they can get focus. And if they kind of do the circular motion on the remote, kind of like they're caressing your icon, they'll move in this motion, which I think is kind of brilliant, because when you're trying to think and pick TV shows or movies or whatever, you're like, oh, well, let's watch this one. And then you're just like, we're watching this one right here, and you're slowly hypnotizing people by kind of having your nervous tick. And Xcode actually also has this, it supports these files too, so you just drop them into your XC Assets bundle directory, and you can see the individual layers as well. But this is good for icons, your app icon, and then at the top, if you don't provide a top shelf content, say your app isn't good for top shelf, there's no reason for you to have multiple items at the top that the user can select. You can provide this really nice like cover artwork at the top that fills up the whole screen of the Apple TV, and it's a kind of a parallaxy artwork thing like this, and it moves around a bit.
By the way, I've seen in the Apple dev forums that NS user default is allowed supports up to 500 kilobytes.
Yeah, and I think that's standard what it supports now anyways. So NS user defaults does stay around, but NS user defaults is also not really good for long-term data storage in the sense of I have lots of content. What does it say? NS user defaults is not a database. Anyways, I'm almost done. So as I was telling you guys when we started this off, I wanted to give kind of an everything presentation for this and go super deep on it, but I realized immediately that this is a whole new platform and too big for one night. So I came up with a couple of ideas for future tvOS topics to give you guys some inspiration. Maybe one of you guys will pick one of these up or create your own. But with tvOS, we have designing for tvOS. We have a whole new human interface guide. So new HIG. In theory, it should be relatively easy to port your iOS apps to tvOS. That'd be a great topic. TVJS and TVML in depth. Everything I did tonight was super simplistic, just to kind of give you a high-level overview of it, but you could probably imagine it can get pretty complex and pretty sophisticated. The focus engine by itself could easily be something you could spend a week on. It's a pretty cool little piece of technology. You can customize it a little bit. It's pretty nice. I think they did a good job on the focus engine. Handling dynamically loaded content, integrating the game controller, and using the top shelf. So that's all I have, guys. Any questions, thoughts, snap remarks?
Do they have like a design guide?
Yeah, so just like for iOS or for OS X, there is a human interface guide, the HIG. There's a whole new one for the Apple TV.
Do they have any guidelines for when you should use the TVML? Is it that you're a JavaScript developer?
I don't. So the best I can see, they kind of briefly mentioned it, but they weren't like super explicit about it. If you want to develop an app that has serial content that is well structured in a, I keep using this phrase, in a hierarchical sense, kind of like Netflix, where they have tons of videos and tons of movies, and or Tumblr, or not Tumblr, but Flickr, where they have tons of photos. Something that is very media heavy, but it's like,
Repetitive content.
yeah, it's very, very serialized. Something like that. That lends itself very well to the TVJS and the TVML. But if you want to build something like Flappy Bird for the TV, or some kind of pro audio app, you probably don't want to use it. Yeah, so if you're more focused on your content than like what your app actually does, your app is more about serving something up, you definitely want to use the TVML, TVJS stuff. But if you're working on an app that is not necessarily about the content that is served up and more about user interaction or doing something on screen, then you want to use the native stuff. And I'm sure I could have said that 1,000 times better, but
They talked at all about what like a submission process would be like.
now, I assume it's going to be very similar to iOS and the App Store on OS 10, but only time will tell.
Although that's another TVJS, TVML advantage. You can change it whenever you want. You don't have to go through the submission
Yeah,
process.
like I said, I couldn't quite get that working, but I mean, in theory, you should be able to update your templates, and I mean, you can update your content, whether it's a native app or whatever, but you can't update your UI on iOS without submitting a whole new binary, and you no longer have to do that if you use the TVML stuff.
What about test distribution? Is there test flight type stuff going on?
I
How
don't
do you
think that is
distribute for
available
beta
on the
testing?
tvOS yet. I did not look into that though. I
I'm just
didn't.
wondering like how you're going to distribute to beta testers.
Well, that is a great question. I am not sure.
Seems like a gap there.
Yeah, it could be something that's there and I just missed it.
Yeah.
It may work, or it could be something that they just haven't added yet. I mean, like I said, it's a brand new
Oh, yeah.
platform.
Totally.
You still can submit that, you know.
Yeah,
So I know
and
before
we
you
don't.
actually
There's not
go.
even a ship date. We don't even know when this thing's gonna hit the
Sometime
shelves.
in October, right?
Late October.
Yeah.
And
Oh, we
I think late October means January these days, right? I don't know. But anyways, Apple TV and the tvOS, super cool, super easy to build for if you know how to build iOS apps. I think it's pretty awesome. Like I said, I'm really excited about it because I use my Apple TV a lot. Anybody have any apps that they think, like personal apps that you guys developed that you were thinking about porting to tvOS at all? Anything we can speak of?
Yeah, I have a video effects app, and I'd like to do like a user content showcase.
Mhm. I think tvOS is like great for that. Like if you have a creation app, your tvOS app could be all about showcasing it, and I think that is a great use case for all the TVML, TVJS stuff. If you have users' content stored on a server somewhere, and you can serve it up that way. But I think it lends itself for that specifically.
Do you know if there's going to be any way to launch an app other than explicit user?
To do what? Sorry.
Is there going to be any way to launch an app or bring one into focus other than user with remote control?
No, I mean just like with iOS, or you can't just do stuff behind the user. You can't programmatically launch your own app or anything like that. There is some background programming, just like standard iOS stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to have the same limitations where it's very locked down.